Darth Vader, the fallen Jedi Knight Anakin Skywalker, turned into arguably the most feared Sith Lord of all time. Among the many grievances with his past he'd endlessly grapple with during his days, watching the world through red lenses and a Durasteel helm, was the rage and indignation he felt for the Jedi Council, overseers of his rank and respect, which he, even at the time, felt wrongly accused and judged by. The Revenge of the Sith novel even sees Anakin coming within a hair's breadth of raising his saber to Master Windu, just as he was told the iconic phrase,
"You are on this council, but we do not grant you the rank of Master."
Today, I'd like to pose and answer the question, if given the chance, at a time when he'd most crave revenge against them, could Darth Vader, Lord of the Sith, defeat the Jedi Council in its entirety? If, with an additional lifetime of Sith teaching and training, could he seize what he'd briefly considered all those years ago, fight off Windu and his peers, which would likely stand in his aid? In this video, I'll be taking a look at each combatant's power levels, saber skills, force abilities, and the like, all within the universe in which said statement was made, Star Wars Legends, to see if Vader, in his hate, had ever surpassed the group with which he perhaps felt the most wronged by. To put this into more practical terms, I'll be judging if at his peak of power, could Vader replicate what Sidious did against Mace's team, but this time against the entire Jedi Council. As far as continuity is concerned, that's always a hot topic with Star Wars. Obviously, a lot has happened regarding the nature of the franchise since George Lucas sold the company in 2012. We have statements that the canon tiers, once clung to by many a fan, are no longer existing internally, yet new Legends content has been developed since then, such as the Star Wars The Old Republic expansions, comic issues, and the currently in development Knights of the Old Republic remake, which, yes, is reportedly not cancelled, it just changed developers. Seeing this, as well as the fact that George Lucas is not involved with Star Wars now, including Legends, it should be fair to simply view the EU as one would any other franchise, which, in my opinion, would be based on consistency, as well as more so the media itself, rather than an author's interpretations, especially when, many times, sources would go against said creators' intentions, with even Lucasfilm licensing staff at the time stating that lower-tiered sources would be deemed more canonical than higher-tier sources depending on certain factors listed on screen here. As is with canon and Legends, contradictions are taken at a case-by-case approach, so my arguments in this video therein are informed by my personal assessment based on information hence stated. With that said, just because George said or thought something at one time, that's not especially relevant when news sources state otherwise, and when the media itself consistently favors contrasting interpretations, evidently favoring quote-unquote lower tier information as opposed to George's. What I'm going to do here is make my way up, describing the subjects of Vader's hate, surmising their best feats and accolades, before comparing them in bulk to the Dark Lords. The Council as of Revenge of the Sith would include Stas Ali, Agen Kolar, not Coleman Trevor, the other Coleman, Saucy Tin, Opa Rancis, Kit Fisto, Plo Koon, Ki-Adi-Mundi, Shaak Ti, Obi-Wan Kenobi, Mace Windu, and Grand Master Yoda. In general, it's been stated that the High Council are the most adept, skilled, and powerful among the Jedi, so even members like Rancis, Coleman, Ali, and such should still be superior to lower-ranked knights or masters based on that, despite not boasting any crazy feats or statements beyond that. Ki-Adi-Mundi is a master of Ataru, the acrobatic and kinetic form primarily utilized by Grandmaster Yoda. He's held in high regard by his peers, being trusted to defeat the former Jedi Aurra Sing, someone who had already dispatched with 2 Jedi Masters on her own. Yoda even stated that among all the Jedi, Mundi was the most skilled to bring in a Dark Jedi. This was around the time of the Phantom Menace, mind you. While there certainly are more skilled fighters, this is still a very impressive accolade. He's among the top 10 most adept duelists of all time. He can use the Force to instill fear in others, heal himself, and even sense lifeless droids. He was even stated on StarWars.com to be in the upper tier of the Council, alongside Yoda and Mace Windu, which, if taken at face value and interpreted to mean Force power, it makes Mundi one of the strongest Force users in the galaxy by far. Plo Koon is, without a doubt, one of the most powerful and skilled Jedi of all time, with a nearly unmatched control of the Force. Darth Maul, around the time of Phantom Menace, holds him in the same breath as Mace Windu, thinking they'd each be a great test of skill. This is consistent with his ability to briefly clash with Savage Opress, Maul's brother, who, based on statements from Dooku as well as his training under Maul, stronger than he'd ever been until then, would place him as more powerful than Maul around the time of the Phantom Menace, with Plo managing to saber clash and dodge Opress's strikes, with the Sith apprentice resorting to tearing off Plo's breathing mask to claim victory. It's even rumored that the Kel Dor Jedi defeated Yoda in a duel. However, based on guides, he's probably safely below the likes of Yoda, Mace, and Dooku, as an example, so the rumor is probably just that. Still, he boasts the unique ability to cast the light side version of Force Lightning called Electric Judgment, with the dark side variant stated to weaken someone's life directly and being nearly impossible to deal with even for the most skilled warriors. An all-around great Jedi Master. Shaak Ti is a master of Makashi and Utaru, styles sported by Count Dooku and Yoda respectively. This is a good mix, as Form 2 isn't really renowned for its power, in contrast to Utaru, so she's very wise to have seemingly combined one style's strongest suit to another where it's more so lacking, with the strength of Form 4 compensating for the more composed and measured approach Form 2 grants the user. She was as well seen combating General Grievous towards the twilight of the Clone War, with it being fair to say she got embarrassed by the Kaleesh warlord. As for her fight against Starkiller, I covered his power level in my recent video pitting him against Cal Kestis. However, it's safe to say that Shaak doesn't quite scale to even Galen's most impressive feats, as he grew far stronger later on into The Force Unleashed 1, as he learned more and more about his secret origin, so she more or less ends up as described. Agen Kolar, Sassy Tin, and Kit Fisto all make up Mace's select strike force, and should therefore reasonably be the top of the council, barring Anakin, who is obviously kind of pushed aside for his perceived lack of wisdom and experience, with Shaak Ti even having said as much. Kolar in particular, beyond just being hyped up by Mace, pretty much only boasts the feat of defeating Quinlan Vos, a fairly impressive Jedi Master. Sassy Tin, another generically top-tier Force user and saber wielder, shown sparring with Mace on occasion, and Kit Fisto, who was able to pretty easily bully Grievous earlier in the war, and was kind of embarrassed by Plo Koon when fighting the bounty hunter Dirge. He's a master of Shi-Cho, or the first lightsaber form, often touted as the most basic and fundamental. However, he was able to use this style to spar with Obi-Wan for hours soon after Attack of the Clones, with the latter being the definitive Soresu warrior. His intent sensing is renowned, being able to read an opponent's emotions very clearly. He was also the only Jedi among Mace's squad capable of parrying even a single attack from Sidious, besides Mace himself, for what that's worth. Obi-Wan Kenobi is the master of Soresu, a defensive style founded on the principles of blaster deflection. His best feat is most likely managing to combat Darth Maul and Savage Opress at the same time. However, Obi's defenses against Maul's force attacks always seem lacking, which is consistent with Dooku managing to ragdoll Obi in Revenge of the Sith via the Force. Yet he was able to just prior press him when skill was concerned. So it seems like when he's most focused, he can manage impressive displays. However, beyond that, I hate to say that I find the Negotiator's power to be very, very overhyped. I find this to be based on his perceived defeat over his once apprentice turn to the dark side. While he obviously did win, we can't ignore the context here. Anakin was conflicted on Mustafar, stated blatantly, with Vader weeping and suffering an identity crisis in the wake of his recent and terrible actions. Obi-Wan even admits that Anakin wasn't paying mind to his own defenses and was in a blind fury when he lost. Obi, post-Attack of the Clones, conceded inferiority to Fisto. He got manhandled by Dooku many times. Both of these fighters would be lesser than that of the actual PT top tiers. Mace did imply he was the only one who could defeat Grievous. However, Mace himself was actually entirely capable of contending with the droid general, and even crushed his chest with the Force, which weakened him leading into his fight, which Obi-Wan barely won, as officially stated. There's just too much going against Kenobi being even close to the likes of an unconflicted Anakin, or Mace, or Yoda, and by extension any threats that scale to them, their power levels and saber skills included. Even if he just outright beat Maul, he's pretty much always pushed to his limits, with Sidious casually ragdolling Maul after he resorts to his raw power. So the same situation is likely to occur if Obi were to combat the likes of Anakin, Mace, or Yoda, seeing as they all scale to Sidious. That's not to say he's totally irrelevant, as of course he is on the Council, and based on feats, he'd still be above the lower level Council members like Rancis, or even Mace's squad. It's likely that if he was on Coruscant, he'd be chosen to help bring in Palpatine as well. Of course, that would end awfully for him, which Yoda pretty much said point blank, but regardless. Speaking of Mace, Windu is actually known as the Master of the Order, whereas Yoda is the Grandmaster. This prestigious rank speaks to his overwhelming power and skill, being a Master of a Pod, which requires high-level mastery over the bulk of the remaining 6 saber forms. This makes Mace one of the deadliest among the Jedi. Form 7 skirts close to the dark side, so close that it's all but forbidden to all those besides Mace and those he deems fit to teach it to. Being perhaps the most forceful and aggressive of all the forms, it draws on Mace's rage and sense of justice, in tandem with redirecting darkside energy, as it did against Sidious in Windu's final duel. His power in the Force is as well legendary, being often compared to Yoda as the most powerful masters in the Order. Given his strength as well as his darkside countering saber style, he was able to nearly defeat Darth Sidious as described numerous times in guidebooks and the like. If not for Anakin's intervention, the light side would have triumphed here and Sidious's scheming would have been for naught. That's how close Windu came to seizing victory. Yoda needs little introduction. As one of the oldest Jedi seen in the series, he's mastered saber combat as well as mastered the Force to an extent rarely ever seen. In his legendary duel with Palpatine, he managed to press and all but stalemate the Dark Lord, made even stronger than he was when combating Mace Windu via the growing dark power taking hold of the galaxy in the wake of Order 66. While he did definitively lose this bout, pushing the at the time most powerful version of Sidious as far as he did is quite probably the best display in the entire prequel era as a whole, barring insane shit like the Ones or something. Fully versed in all forms of dueling, Yoda favored Utaru and was the definitive master of it, showing up the likes of Dooku and routinely besting Windu in their spars, 2 of the best duelists of the age. He boasts barrier creation, energy redirection, and nullification with Tuna Menace, Force Stun, without a doubt a top contender for the most capable Force wielder of his time. Moving on to Darth Vader, he is one of the most powerful and skilled Force users to ever live. After rising through the ranks of the Jedi Order, being a master in all but name, being stated numerous times to be one of, if not the strongest being in the galaxy. In his madness and confliction, he was struck down by his former master, left for a time broken. As presented through the pages of Dark Lord, The Rise of Darth Vader, acting as the sequel to the Revenge of the Sith novel in the officially recognized Dark Lord trilogy of novels, we see the fallen Jedi once again forge himself into the all but unstoppable weapon he once was, if not beyond. He'd make upgrades to his suit, make strides in compensating for his doubts, and become so lethal that he'd seemingly reach the level of power he once held as a Jedi Knight, with the Force coursing through him in a way having nothing to do with his cybernetics or Durasteel armor. Starting out as a doubt-filled dark side novice, Sidious would train Vader in the hopes of becoming greater than Anakin Skywalker, which he'd eventually achieve. Just as Sidious grew in power since the prequels via his study of the dark side, so too did Vader through training and combat. This is evident via his multiple comparisons to prior prequel-era top tiers and his further supremacy above them. In the early days of the Empire, a Darksider boasting the power of Vader, yet none of his control, faced Yoda as he was on Dagobah, managing to combat the once Grandmaster of the Order for days before being bested, as well as Nick Rostu, someone who had fought beside Mace Windu against the powerful Kar Vastor, stating that Vader's power dwarfed Vastor's, with the latter being stated stronger and faster than Mace, and more on Yoda or Anakin's level of power, and Vader is simply far stronger than Vastor by comparison. Both of these examples are very early on in Vader's growth, as he'd constantly train and refine his abilities in all facets. From A New Hope to Empire to Return of the Jedi, each entry would see Vader becoming stronger and stronger, every time reaching a new peak in power above what he was. In the much beloved Shadows of the Empire, Vader even muses that his son, Luke Skywalker, is stronger than all Jedi throughout history, with statements claiming the Sith Lord easily dealt with Luke on Cloud City, and with Luke himself later comparing a Night Sister dominating him through the Force to the hand he believed his father would have dealt him if Vader wasn't holding back on his only family in Return of the Jedi. So he not only manhandled a Force user he believed to be stronger than the likes of Mace and Yoda, but he'd also bully an even stronger and more adept version of Luke in the young Skywalker's own words if Darth Vader was not holding back. In terms of dueling, Vader was a master of all forms of combat, including hand-to-hand, as he'd dominate high-ranking Imperial guards, trained to perfection in all the arts of war. Against multiple attackers, all using various unpredictable means of attack, Vader simply alternated between every fighting method, a trait evocative of the highest level of skill possible. Even at a time where the likes of Yoda, Obi-Wan, and Sidious were all active and certainly capable of saber combat for the most part, Vader was affirmed as the greatest duelist in the galaxy. As far as Force powers and abilities, it would be quicker to state what Vader doesn't have access to. See my video detailing Vader in full to learn more, but it's safe to say that if there is a dark or light side technique, Vader can most likely perform it masterfully, as he was upheld by Sidious as a Dark Lord, and he stated a master of the Force itself many times. He can probe his enemy's mind for their fears, empower himself off said fears, fire Force judgment, use to diminish, blow up the kyber crystals within lightsabers. Simply put, he's a supremely versatile combatant. With all of our fighters described, how does this matchup go down? Could Vader single-handedly wipe a squad containing some of the greatest forces the light side has ever produced? Honestly, I think he's got a good shot. I think most people would agree that based on their feats in scaling, or lack thereof, that most of the council members are falling to Vader's blade pretty early. Stas Ali, Agen Kolar, Coleman, Sassy Tin, Opa Rancis. As crazy as it might sound, the evidence is there to support Vader being able to run through these guys fairly easily. While they are more adept than the bulk of the Order, various guides and sources place Vader as transcending his power as a Jedi Knight, with Anakin Skywalker being stated the most powerful warrior, period, numerous times, especially with the dark side on his side, bearing his waning adherence to it and his confliction against the far weaker Obi-Wan. He was already stronger than Sidious for a brief period, with Vader eventually surpassing that level many times over, as stated. While Sidious undoubtedly grew stronger over the course of the dark times leading into the original trilogy, the fact still remains that Vader, by his prime, would as well be far greater than the likes of Nightfall Anakin, as well as Revenge of the Sith Sidious. So given the fact that a Sidious, weaker than he was when he fought Yoda, and weaker than Nightfall Anakin, who is weaker than Prime Vader, was able to quickly dispatch with 3 of the best council member fighters sans Mace and Yoda at the same time. Vader would likely, based on all this evidence, be able to do the same. There are statements that Sidious's weird scream here nerfed his opponents, granting him the easy victory. Even at face value, this wouldn't change much, as Vader as well has access to certain light side nerfing powers, with the dark side in him passively striking fear in those nearby, nearly drowning them in terror. I believe both Sidious versus Mace's squad, as well as the events of Star Wars Purge, or even Grievous fighting off multiple council members and winning, act as apt templates for how this fight would go down. In Star Wars Purge, an enraged Vader hoping to seize revenge against Obi-Wan is led into a trap by 8 Order 66 survivors. The first Jedi lunges for a strike and is immediately struck down. Another is effortlessly pushed to the side. Another one falls. Vader is scored by a blade with no apparent damage, dodges another swing, reposits, and is met by a cortosis blade. These Jedi having prepared for this Vader, eager to satiate his bloodlust. The blade disables his saber for the next few minutes. The Sith simply snaps her neck and takes the blade for himself. He swiftly deactivates the sabers of 3 Jedi one after the other. He loses a hand, however, is struck in the leg, and feigns surrender. The Jedi debate whether to kill their seemingly defeated opponent, leading to betrayal. Vader in turn rises to his feet and easily bears a blade into his next victim's chest. Now just 3 Jedi remain, 4 brought down by Vader's own hands. Clones arrive in dispatch of one more. Vader clutches the last master in the air, sustaining a saber through to the head, holding him in place as blaster fire takes his life. Keep in mind too that despite ultimately being heavily damaged after this, Vader here is only from 1 month after Revenge of the Sith. A drop in the bucket compared to what he'd become by the time of Return of the Jedi, making the likes of Masters Yoda and Windu irrelevant by comparisons. Also keep in mind here that these Jedi were prepared for Darth Vader, whereas in this what-if fight scenario, the Council would have no idea what Vader is capable of. It's just some threat from the future that none of them recognize coming after them. Also keep in mind that in tandem with the already stated Car Vastor comparison to Mace, this early Vader level combatant with none of his self-control was able to stalemate Yoda for days. A Force user's lack of control can make all the difference in a fight. A good example is Attack of the Clones Anakin, being stated to possibly have Yoda's level of power already, only lacking the skill to make the most of it compared to the roughly 900-year-old Grandmaster. So having the power but lacking control over it can take one from barely pressing Dooku, if even that, to pushing him into retreating and being his superior. Given that, it's safe to say that Vader, by the time he's mastered the Force and surpassed his various peaks multiple times, he'd be able to replicate this feat with far greater ease, even against foes as prestigious as the Jedi Council. However, this would certainly be the toughest fight of Vader's life, and he'd have to play it smart at every turn. Against old Ben, remembering his last duel, Vader took a very safe and measured approach against his former master, leading to a visually underwhelming fight. However, if he let his hatred get the better of him as it did on Mustafar and in Purge to some extent, it could easily create openings for the other remaining Jedi to exploit. Force Judgment's resemblance to Force Lightning could easily potentially cause some trouble for Vader. However, again, if the Dark Lord used the utmost of his skills, he could counter it with his own electric judgment or two to menace. Vapod's ability to redirect dark energy is notable, however, it was already being pushed to its breaking point against Revenge of the Sith Sidious, who, I've already established, pales in comparison to Vader's prime. Form 7 would only prove useful for so long. Obi-Wan was pretty much pushed to his utmost limits against a severely weakened and conflicted Anakin, stated to be between worlds and vulnerable, and even lacking his Sith eyes to visually signify this. He only gets them back after he's burning on the shore of lava. Anakin, when in the right mind, was shown and stated to be far above the likes of Dooku, who consistently bullied and ragdolled Obi. A Vader far stronger than that Anakin and Dooku, who's already tempered his emotions to the point of remaining in control against Kenobi, would surely dispatch with the negotiator with little difficulty in this hypothetical. As far as saber combat, Vader has dealt with multiple attackers all sporting alternating and unpredictable techniques assaulting him at once, with the Sith easily parrying and countering via his mastery of all combat. Per this, he'd simply be able to replicate any of these masters' favored forms. The Council's best bet is if maybe Obi-Wan could create some kind of psychological opening within Vader, although he probably would not know that it was Anakin unless he said something to give it away, which would leave him either uncontrolled or off guard, with Plo's lightning interfering then with the Sith's life support, and Yoda and Mace just pummeling Vader as the two powerhouses present among the Jedi. However, in all honesty, against a seasoned, mature, measured, and wise Return of the Jedi Vader, I see the Dark Lord bullying most of the less relevant members through the Force alone towards the start of this encounter. We've seen a no-nonsense Vader do this very thing against the likes of Ram Koda as an example, as well as many masters seen in Purge. The likes of Saci Tin, Fisto, etc. are all falling to his blade even faster than they did against Sidious, leaving Vader to contend with the likes of Windu, who was already stated to be a drop in the ocean that is the Sith Lord's power, and Yoda, who an essentially massively nerfed and far weaker Vader already matched for days on end. Also, Vader and Sidious have managed to fight off multiple Jedi Masters. However, the Jedi in contrast have rarely ever successfully jumped an opponent. Grievous bodied multiple Council members in the 2D Clone Wars, Maul even managed to outmaneuver Qui-Gon and Obi to a point, as well as Mace and Aayla Secura. This scenario almost always ends in favor of the villain, with Darth Sidious regarding Vader as his masterpiece and the greatest Jedi killer of all time, placing him above the likes of Grievous and Maul, who again, when the Jedi had the numbers on their side, was still able to contend with and in most cases outdo them. In summary, much of, if not all of the Jedi Council are weaker than Anakin, who Vader far surpasses at his peak, with the likes of Revenge of the Sith Sidious, whom Vader as well eclipsed, and the Sith Lord himself boasting feats of team-busting multiple Jedi at once. Darth Vader's intense study and various abilities, all featuring a counter to the Council's own powers, lightning, Vapod, mind reading, as well as saber combat, would all grant him a fairly hard-fought victory over those who'd rejected his ascension to Jedi Master 2 decades prior. With all of that said, thanks for watching, and be sure to let me know any future rankings or matchups you'd want to see later in the future. As always, I'll see you all next time.